In one zero ad, the most feared warriors on Earth, Vikings who had conquered half of Europe, met their match on American shores, not from an empire or army, but from canoes carrying native defenders who had never seen iron weapons. Within days, the unstoppable Norse expansion came to a permanent halt. Picture this. battle-hardened Vikings, men who had raided Paris and conquered England, running for their longboats through Newfoundland forests. Behind them, shadows move between trees. Arrows whistle past their heads. These are the same warriors who laughed at death, now fleeing from hunters they called Skraelings. 470 years before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west, Vikings had already established colonies in North America. They called it Vinland, land of wine, rich soil, endless timber, grapes growing wild, paradise for a civilization cramped on frozen rocks. By the end of this video, you'll understand how Stone Age weapons defeated steel, why the Vikings never returned, and the single moment that saved Native America from Norse conquest. But here's what the history books don't tell you. First, the secret weapon that terrified Viking berserkers, men who fought bears for sport. Second, the tactical genius of the native ambush that turned forest into fortress. Third, how a single bull changed the course of human history. How could warriors who raided Paris flee from fur traders? What happened in those forests that haunted Norse sagas for centuries? These aren't just questions. They're keys to understanding a battle that redirected 5 centuries of human civilization. Days earlier, Thorvald Eriksson stood on these same shores. "This arrow will cause my death," he said, pulling a stone point from beneath his arm. The son of Eric the Red, brother to Leif the Lucky, died within hours. His prophecy came true, but it was only the beginning. To understand how the masters of medieval warfare met their match, we must first understand who these Vikings really were. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of history's most decisive battles, where underdogs changed the world, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Ring the bell to witness how history's greatest warriors met their match. Now, let me transport you to the year 1000 AD. Europe in the year 1000 trembled at one word, Viking. From London's burning churches to Paris's ransomed walls, Norse long ships meant death. Their expansion seemed unstoppable. Iceland fell, Greenland fell. The Atlantic itself couldn't contain their ambition. 3 names would write this chapter of history. Eriksson, the Lucky, Christianity's newest warrior convert, who discovered Vinland by accident. His brother, Thorvald Iron Arm, seeking glory to match his famous sibling, and Thorin Carsiphanini the Wealthy, a merchant prince who saw gold where others saw grapes. But who were the Skraelings? The Norse word means wretched ones. Yet these wretches would accomplish what no European army could. Modern archaeology suggests hunters, possible ancestors of the Delaware, maybe both. What matters is this. They knew their land like Vikings knew the sea. Vinland represented everything Norse expansion craved. Timber for ships. Greenland had none. Grapes for wine worth more than gold in medieval Europe. Fertile soil for farming. Game for hunting. Iron bog deposits for weapons. Paradise compared to Greenland's ice prison. The sagas describe butterflies thick as snow. Salmon leaping into nets. Winter mild as Norwegian spring. Why stop at Iceland? Why settle for Greenland's frozen misery? The Viking mindset demanded expansion. Their gods rewarded the bold. Each generation must claim new lands or face shame. Younger sons needed kingdoms. Ships needed timber. People needed food. Consider the strategic implications. Greenland survived on 2 things: European trade and hope. Hope that somewhere across the Western Sea lay resources to sustain their precarious existence. Vinland validated that hope. establishing permanent settlements there would secure Norse dominance for centuries, fail, and Greenland itself might wither. The natives had watched these pale strangers before. When Leif first landed, they observed from forest edges, studied their iron tools, counted their numbers, marked their habits. Where Vikings saw empty wilderness, natives saw a homeland under threat, two world views about to collide with explosive force. What the Vikings found across the Atlantic would shatter every assumption about warfare they held. Their tactical superiority meant nothing here. Their steel advantage minimized, their battle formations useless. The very landscape fought against them. Trees provided endless cover, rivers allowed rapid movement, forests maze, like to foreign eyes, became highways for native feet. This psychological element proved crucial. Vikings conquered through fear. Their reputation preceded them. But here, no reputation, no fear, only strangers in strange boats, outnumbered and far from home. The intimidation that worked from Ireland to Russia meant nothing to people who had never heard Norse names. Most critically, Vikings excelled at set-piece battles, shield walls on open ground, cavalry charges across plains, naval engagements in fjords. But forest warfare, ambush tactics, guerrilla resistance, these weren't in their playbook. They'd entered an arena where every rule they knew was wrong. Where armor became burden, where formations became targets, where bravery became foolishness. The Viking force of 1021 AD represented Norse colonization at its peak. 160 settlers, including women and children, 30 battle-hardened warriors in mail armor, 5 long ships carrying dreams of permanent settlement. Led by Thorin Cafanany, they brought everything needed to establish a new world. Cattle for farming, tools for building, weapons for conquering. Analyze their arsenal. Each warrior carried a two-handed battle axe weighing up to 4, devastating in close combat. Round wooden shields reinforced with iron bosses, chainmail shirts worth a fortune protecting vital organs. Iron helmets without horns despite Hollywood myths, swords for the wealthy, spears for common fighters, bows pulling 80 pounds, deadly at 100 yards. Against them, the natives carried weapons that seemed primitive, but proved perfect for their environment. Boughs of hickory and elm, pulling 60 lb, but wielded by hunters who could thread arrows through forest gaps. Tomahawks balanced for both throwing and close combat, 3 strikes per second in practiced hands. Stone points designed to shatter inside wounds, knowledge worth more than steel. Every game trail, every hiding spot, every tactical advantage the land offered. The terrain itself chose sides. Newfoundland's forest differed completely from European battlefields. Thick undergrowth that grabbed at legs, canopy so dense noon felt like dusk, sounds muffled and distorted. Sightlines measured in feet, not hundreds of yards. Vikings trained for shield wall combat found themselves scattered, isolated, vulnerable. Pre-Columbian tensions built slowly. Natives had been watching since the first Viking landing. They saw strangers cutting sacred trees, observed them taking resources without asking, counted their warriors, noted their routines. From concealment, they studied Viking behavior patterns. When did centuries change? Where did hunters travel? How fast could they form battle lines? But wait, the forest had eyes. The first recorded encounter came when Vikings discovered 9 natives sleeping under overturned canoes. 8 died before they could rise. 1 escaped into the forest. That single survivor would change everything. Within hours, every native group within 50 knew about the pale strangers who killed without warning. Thorvald commanded that first contact. Skraelings, he sneered, seeing their hide clothing and stone weapons. The arrogance proved fatal. As his men celebrated their easy victory, Thorvald noticed movement on the water. Skin boats, dozens of them approaching fast. He ordered shield wall formation, but there was no time. The arrow came from nowhere, Later sagas describe it as guided by fate itself. It curved around Thorvald's shield, finding the gap beneath his arm where armor couldn't protect. A stone point crafted by primitive hands felled the son of Eric the Red. I have gotten a good land in my grasp, though I'll enjoy little benefit from it, he gasped. Within hours, he was dead. This death changed everything. Where Vikings expected easy conquest, they found determined resistance. Where they anticipated primitive savages, they encountered tactical sophistication. The natives had spent generations perfecting forest warfare. Every child learned to move silently through undergrowth. Every hunter could vanish into green shadows. Every warrior knew patience trumped aggression. The pattern was set. Viking aggression met native adaptation. Open combat versus hidden strikes. Steel strength against stone cunning. Two military philosophies colliding in New Finland's dark forests. Neither side understood the other's language, customs, or intentions, but both understood violence. Karlfani arrived the following year with his massive expedition. He knew about his predecessor's death, but dismissed it as bad luck. Thorvald had been careless, aggressive, foolish. Karlsefan would be different, cautious, diplomatic, smart. He brought trade goods alongside weapons. His strategy: establish peaceful relations first, use force only if necessary. History pivoted on this decision. Karlsefan chose a defensive position near the coast, high ground with clear fields of fire, long houses built for defense. Sentries posted day and night. He would not repeat Thorvald's mistakes, but the natives had learned from that encounter, too. They knew Viking weapons now, understood their tactics. Most importantly, they knew Vikings could die. With Thorvald's blood-staining American soil, the stage was set for an encounter that would determine whether Europe would colonize America 5 centuries early. Dawn broke over Karkanani settlement with deceptive peace. Day 1 brought surprise, canoes emerging from morning mist like ghosts. Vikings scrambled for weapons, shields raised, arrows knocked. But the natives didn't attack. They stared, both sides frozen in mutual assessment. Then, as silently as they appeared, the canoes withdrew, hearts pounded in the aftermath. What did this mean? Day 3 changed everything. The natives returned bearing furs, universal trade language, goods for goods. Kalkani made a brilliant tactical decision, or so it seemed. He offered milk from their cattle. The natives had never tasted it before. Their wonder at this strange white liquid broke tension. Laughter replaced suspicion. Trade began. For precious moments, history teetered toward peace. Natives brought pelts worth fortunes in European markets. Vikings offered milk and red cloth, exotic treasures to native eyes. No common language, but pointing and gestures sufficed. Children peered from behind their mothers. Warriors lowered weapons. Perhaps Vinland could be shared after all. But here's where the sagas go silent about a crucial detail. A young native, fascinated by Viking steel, reached for an axe. Its weight, balance, edge, all alien perfection to someone who knew only stone. A Viking moved to stop him. Hands grabbed. The struggle lasted seconds. The axe fell. Blood sprayed across trade goods. Whose blood the sagas differ, Viking or native, accident or attack. What matters is this: trust died in that moment. The native grabbed the axe and ran. His people vanished into forest within heartbeats. Behind them, a corpse and shattered peace. The milk of friendship curdled into poison of war. Hour by hour, Vikings fortified frantically, long house doors reinforced, weapons distributed to every adult, shields hung on walls for quick access. Women taught basic combat stances. The settlement transformed from trading post to military camp. Case Effin knew what was coming. The only questions were when and how many. In forest shadows, native councils convened. The death, whether Viking or their own, demanded response. But these weren't simple revenge seekers. They were strategists who had defended this land for generations. Elders spoke of Viking weaknesses observed during trading. Their armor slowed them. Their formations required open ground. They relied on sight, not sound. They knew nothing of forest ways. Then came the vanishing. No natives appeared for days. Viking patrols found nothing but silence. This psychological warfare worked perfectly. Every snapping branch became an enemy. Every bird call might signal attack. Sleep came fitfully, nerves frayed, warriors jumped at shadows. The waiting itself became a weapon, but the forest wasn't empty. Viking patrols found signs for those who could read them. Broken arrows left deliberately in paths, warnings or threats, footprints that appeared and vanished. How many watched from concealment? Tree marks fresh as morning, counting Viking numbers or marking attack routes. The evidence mounted. They were surrounded by an enemy they couldn't see. On the fourth night, Fanny made a desperate decision. He would send a patrol deep into the forest, find the native camps, negotiate, or intimidate, whatever worked. 10 of his best warriors vanished into green darkness. They returned at dawn, pale and shaken. They'd found nothing but felt eyes everywhere. One swore he'd been touched in the darkness. Another heard breathing beside him all night. The forest itself seemed hostile. The calm before storm pressed down like physical weight. Vikings performed weapon drills obsessively. Sharpened already sharp blades, checked and rechecked armor straps. But how do you prepare for an enemy you can't see? How do you form shield walls against shadows? Every Viking military manual became useless paper. They were fighting the land itself, and the land was losing patience. What happened next defied every rule of medieval warfare. As the fifth dawn approached, centuries noticed something impossible. The forest edge, clearly visible moments before, seemed closer, not moving, just closer. Then they realized the truth. It wasn't the forest moving, it was what came from it. Hundreds of skin boats materialized from hidden coves. They moved in perfect coordination, no war cries, no horns, just silent approach. The Vikings had expected screaming charges like European enemies. This disciplined advance chilled blood more than any battle rage could. These weren't savages. These were professionals who had turned their homeland into a weapon. When the sun rose on the fifth day, the Vikings would face a form of warfare they'd never imagined. Dawn exploded into chaos. Hundreds of canoes swept from 3 directions simultaneously. Ocean approach, river flanking, forest emergence. The Vikings counted 30 boats, then 50, then stopped counting. Each carried 5 to 8 warriors. Simple mathematics turned terrifying. 300 attackers minimum against 30 armored Vikings and 130 settlers. First volley darkened the morning sky. Vikings raised shields instinctively, forming the wall that had never failed them. From England to Russia, the shield wall meant victory. Overlapping wood and iron, each man protecting his neighbor, spears bristling outward like a human hedgehog. Arrows struck with sounds like hail on rooftops. But then physics went wrong. Arrows began curving around shields. The natives used shorter bows, firing high trajectories. Arrows fell from above, finding gaps between shields and helmets. A Viking screamed, arrow through his foot. Another gasped, point, finding the neck gap in his armor. The unbreakable wall began breaking. Native tactic 1 revealed itself, false retreats. A group charged Viking lines through tomahawks, then fled toward forests. Young Vikings, blood hot with battle fury, pursued. Hold the wall, Culsiphany screamed, but warrior instincts overwhelmed discipline. 5 Vikings chased 20 natives into the treine. The trap snapped shut instantly. Those 20 became 60 as concealed warriors rose from undergrowth. The 5 Vikings found themselves surrounded, separated, doomed. Close combat erupted, exactly what natives wanted. In open ground, Viking axes devastated. In thick forest, their long handles caught on branches. Heavy armor exhausted them. Meanwhile, natives danced through familiar terrain, tomahawks finding every armor gap. Sensory overload consumed the battlefield. Viking war cries mixed with native elation. Steel rang against stone. Men screamed in languages neither understood. The familiar stench of blood and fear filled nostrils, but mixed with alien smells, pine sap, unfamiliar plants, forest decay. Everything felt wrong. In the center, young Bjorn faced his first real combat. 19 summers old, trained since childhood, he thought himself ready. The native warrior who faced him looked no older. They circled in a clearing barely 6 ft wide. Bjorn swung his axe, a killing stroke in practice yards. But here, the weapon embedded in a tree, in that heartbeat of vulnerability, the tomahawk found his temple. Statistical shock mounted quickly. Within the first hour, 8 Vikings dead, 12 wounded, only 4 confirmed native casualties. The kill ratio that should favor steel wasn't happening. Worse, Viking casualties were permanent. Native losses seemed to regenerate as forest disgorged fresh warriors. The forest maze claimed more victims. Pursuing Vikings became lost within 50 yards of camp. Every tree looked identical. Sounds echoed deceptively. Men who'd navigated trackless seas couldn't find their way back. They called for help, revealing positions to native hunters. One by one, isolated Vikings fell to arrows from invisible bows. Native tactic, too, demonstrated terrifying innovation. Treetop archers, while Vikings searched at ground level, death came from above. Warriors had climbed trees in darkness, waiting. They rained arrows straight down where shields couldn't protect. Helmets deflected some, but shoulders, feet, hands, all vulnerable from this angle. Vikings had never conceived of three-dimensional battlefield tactics. Then came the moment that should have turned the tide. Ragnar Ironside, Kayfan's champion, went berserk, the fury of the berserker, legendary state where pain vanished and strength doubled. He charged alone into native ranks, axe whirling, seemingly invulnerable. Bodies fell around him, native lines wavered. But the forest doesn't respect berserkers. Ragnar pursued fleeing natives into undergrowth. His fury made him careless. He didn't see the rope stretched between trees. When he fell, 20 tomahawks found him simultaneously. The natives had studied Viking combat methods and developed counters. Even berserker rage had limits. Bodies accumulated with shocking speed. The pristine settlement became a charral ground. Vikings dragged wounded comrades behind buildings. Women emerged to defend their children, knives against tomahawks, but the native numbers seemed infinite. For every warrior who fell, 2 emerged from forest shadows. Then the impossible that became legendary. Kalkin's bull, brought for breeding stock, broke free from its pen. The massive beast, maddened by battle sounds and blood scent, charged through the combat zone. To Vikings, this was livestock. To natives who'd never seen cattle, this was a demon. The bull's appearance shattered native momentum. Warriors who'd faced armored Vikings without flinching fled from this bellowing monster. Its horns caught one warrior, tossing him like a child's doll. The psychological impact was instant and devastating. What other demons did these strangers command? Case, Ephany seized the moment. Form up. Shield wall back to the long house. Vikings retreated step by step, dragging wounded, shields locked. The bull's rampage bought precious minutes. Native attack coordination collapsed as warriors dealt with this supernatural threat. Some tried to kill it, others fled. Commands in different languages added to chaos. The temporary advantage let Vikings reach defensive positions. The longhouse, built for this possibility, had firing slots and reinforced walls. Women passed water to exhausted warriors. Wounded received basic treatment. Weapons were redistributed, but the respite was brief. Outside, natives regrouped with frightening speed. Night brought no relief. Native warriors knew darkness like old friends. Vikings, exhausted from daylight battle, faced fresh assaults. Fire arrows began falling. The wooden longhouse, their shelter, became a potential death trap. Bucket brigades formed. Women and children fought flames while men held the walls. Dawn revealed the full horror. Viking dead 11. Wounded 19. Combat effective, maybe 20. Native casualties impossible to count, but their numbers hadn't decreased. If anything, more canoes dotted the water, more shadows flitted between trees. The mathematics of annihilation became clear. Final assault came with disciplined coordination. Natives had spent the night planning, no more piecemeal attacks. This time, simultaneous pressure from all sides. Fire arrows increased. Tomahawk throwers worked in teams. One to make Vikings raise shields, another to exploit the opening. The noose tightened inexorably. Case Ethne faced the hardest decision of his life. Stay and die heroically or retreat and live with shame. But shame meant nothing to dead men, and these weren't just warriors. Women and children would die, too. The merchant prince proved his wisdom. To the ships, the order that saved Norse lives but ended Norse dreams. The retreat became a fighting withdrawal. Vikings formed a hollow square, civilians in the center, fighting toward the beach. Every step cost blood. Natives pressed from all sides, sensing victory. The 100 yards to the ships felt like miles. Men who'd conquered half of Europe found themselves running from primitives. Rear guard action fell to the bravest. 5 Vikings volunteered to hold while others boarded. They knew it meant death. Their names deserve remembering. Thorgeir, Snorri, Grimald, Thorhall, Kettle. They stood shield to shield, buying time with their lives. Songs should honor their sacrifice, but even Sarahs struggled to glorify retreat. As longboats pushed off blood-soaked beaches, the Vikings knew something unprecedented had happened. The retreat turned into organized panic. Vikings abandoned everything they couldn't carry in one trip. The forge, representing months of labor left standing, precious iron tools scattered in dirt, half-built structures that would puzzle archaeologists centuries later. Pride mattered less than survival. These weren't conquerors anymore. They were refugees fleeing for their lives. What they left behind tells the story. Iron nails worth fortunes in Greenland trampled into mud. The anvil carried across treacherous seas, abandoned whetstones, cooking pots, even weapons dropped by wounded men. Each item represented dreams of permanent settlement. Now they would just wait, slowing escape. The natives would collect these treasures, proof of their victory. On the beach, final tragedy struck. As the last longboat pushed off, an arrow whistled from the treine. It caught the helmsman in the throat. He toppled backward, blood spraying across Kalkan's face. The boat spun rudderless, while men scrambled to take control. Those final moments encapsulated everything. Even in victory, the Vikings remained targets. Even escaping, death followed. Native victory celebrations erupted as longboats vanished into morning mist. Warriors who'd hidden fear behind battle masks now danced on blood-stained beaches. They'd done the impossible, defeated iron with stone, expelled invaders without surrendering land. Women emerged from forest sanctuaries. Children touched abandoned Viking weapons with wonder. Elders nodded approval at young warriors who'd proved themselves. The death count told a stark story. Vikings, 15 confirmed dead, 23 wounded, several who died during the voyage home. 1/3 of their fighting force eliminated. Natives, numbers disputed by sagas, but likely fewer than 20 killed. The technological advantage had meant nothing. Stone Age weapons in skilled hands had crushed Iron Age invaders. Psychological impact proved even more devastating than physical casualties. These Vikings had grown up on stories of invincibility. Their fathers conquered England. Their grandfathers terrorized France. They themselves had planned to add America to Norse dominions. Instead, they fled like whipped dogs from enemies. they dismissed as wretches. How do you explain that to the scolds? How do you face families of the dead? The wounded spoke in whispers during the voyage home. They fight like forest spirits, one said, arrows still embedded in his shoulder. Another, delirious with fever, screamed about eyes in the trees. Strong men who'd laughed at death now jumped at creaking ropes. The New World had broken something fundamental in Viking confidence. They'd met their masters, and the masters wore fur instead of steel. Kalkani made his decision before they reached open ocean. This land wants us dead, he told his council. No debate followed. Everyone had seen enough. Vinland's riches weren't worth Viking blood. Let others chase that dream. The survivors would return to Greenland with lives, if not honor. Sometimes wisdom means knowing when you're beaten. That final skirmish at Loading proved the pattern. Even in retreat, natives pressed their advantage. They could have allowed peaceful withdrawal. Instead, they emphasized the lesson. Vikings weren't welcome here, ever. The message was received. No ambiguity remained. The Atlantic would be the boundary, not another Viking highway. The final arrow, one that killed the helmsman, carried special meaning. Natives had learned Viking vulnerabilities. They knew where armor didn't protect. They understood Norse navigation needs. That arrow said, "We can kill you whenever we choose. You survive because we allow it. Don't return." For the natives, immediate consequences were profound. They now possessed iron tools, weapons, and knowledge. Viking tactics had been observed, countered, defeated. The defensive template was established. Future invaders would face people who knew European warfare and how to defeat it. The abandoned settlement became a classroom where native warriors studied their enemies' methods. Power dynamics shifted among native groups. Those who'd fought gained prestige. Warriors wore Viking artifacts as trophies. The battle sites became sacred ground. Stories spread through trade networks. The pale strangers could be beaten. Unity against invaders became cultural memory. When Europeans returned centuries later, they'd face people whose ancestors had already won this war. Norse items transformed into sacred objects. Kalkan's abandoned sword became a chief symbol. Broken Viking shields decorated longhouses. Iron fragments were worked into ceremonial pieces. These weren't just trophies. They were reminders, physical proof, that the ancestors had faced demons from across the water and triumphed. The Vikings would never return, but the echoes of these battles would resonate through history in ways no one could imagine. The sagas wrote themselves. Within a generation, every Norse hall knew the tale. How Fani the wealthy became Fanani the wise by retreating. How stone defeated steel. How the new world rejected its wood. Be conquerors. Skalds struggled with the narrative. How do you glorify defeat? They focused on individual heroism while acknowledging collective failure. The truth was too important to hide. European expansion delayed by 500 years. Consider the implications. If Vikings had established permanent settlements, if they'd brought more colonists, if they'd adapted to forest warfare, history shifts completely. Columbus discovers a continent already carved into Norse kingdoms. Native populations face European diseases centuries earlier. The demographic collapse happens in 1100, not 1500. Everything changes. What if Vikings had succeeded? Alternative history suggests terrifying possibilities. Norse Greenland, reinforced by Vinland resources, survives the Little Ice Age. Viking expansion continues southward. They encounter Aztec and Inca empires at their peak, not weakened Spanish conquistadors, but full-strength Norse armies. Medieval technology meets medieval technology. The outcome, unknowable, but certainly bloodier. Native tactical innovations deserve study. Their forest warfare techniques preceded similar developments by centuries. Vietnam, Afghanistan, modern militaries learning what native defenders proved in 121. Technology alone doesn't guarantee victory. Terrain plus determination plus tactical adaptation can defeat any invader. The template was written in Newfoundland forests. Modern archaeological evidence confirms saga accounts. Lancer Meadows reveals Viking buildings exactly where stories placed them. Carbon dating 121 AD precisely. Tree rings don't lie. Artifacts match descriptions. Even the forge remains abandoned as Sarah's claimed. Science validates oral history. The battles happened, the Vikings fled, the natives won, but here's the deeper lesson. One that transcends military history. The Vikings represented inevitability, technological superiority, expansionist ideology, demographic pressure. They should have won. Every material advantage favored them. Yet, they didn't just lose. They were so thoroughly defeated that they never tried again. Their entire culture built on expansion accepted a boundary. Why? Because warfare isn't just about weapons. It's about will, knowledge, adaptation. The natives possessed what Vikings couldn't: perfect unity between warrior and terrain. Every tree was an ally. Every shadow offered advantage. You can't conquer a people who are the land they defend. Vikings understood oceans. Natives understood forests. In Newfoundland, forest trumped ocean. The parallel lessons echo through time. Afghanistan earned the title Graveyard of Empires using similar principles. Soviet technology, American firepower, both failed against defenders who merged with landscape. Vietnam taught identical lessons. Technological superiority means nothing when every step might be your last. When the land itself seems hostile, when defenders need only patience while invaders need everything. Full circle to our opening paradox. The most feared warriors on earth met farmers and hunters. Stone Age met Iron Age. The outcome should have been genocide. Instead, Stone won. Patience conquered aggression. Knowledge defeated strength. In those forests, 300 native warriors accomplished what no European army could. They stopped the Vikings cold. The Atlantic Ocean became wider that day, not physically but psychologically. For 500 years, it remained a barrier north ships wouldn't cross. When Europeans finally returned, they came in different ships with different weapons, different diseases. But they faced descendants of warriors who'd already won this war once. History pivoted in a new Finland forest, and the pivot point, a stone arrowhead in Viking flesh, proving that sometimes the old ways are stronger than the